"Please, buy our puppy," the little girl whispered. She didn't yet know she was looking into the eyes of the man who had once taken everything from them. The biting January wind whipped through the busy city streets, carrying with it the faint smell of roasted chestnuts from a vendor down the block. The ground was crusted with old snow, gray at the edges from the dirt and salt of passing cars. At the entrance to a massive shopping mall, surrounded by swarms of people rushing in and out with bags, a small girl stood almost perfectly still. Her cheeks were flushed pink from the cold, her little nose red, and her arms wrapped tightly around a tiny golden puppy. Lily was only 6 years old, but in that moment she felt much older. She held the puppy the way a child clings to the last thing in the world that feels safe. His small body shook from the cold, and every few seconds she would lean down, breathing warm air into his fur to keep him comfortable. Her blonde hair peeked out from under a knitted hat that was just a bit too big, slipping over one eye. A few feet away stood her mother, Sarah. She was dressed in a worn blue winter jacket, her long dark hair tangled from the wind. Her once bright brown eyes were dim now, tired and heavy-lidded from nights with little sleep. Sarah kept glancing toward the mall entrance, as if debating whether they should even be here. She had always hated the idea of standing in public like this, asking strangers for help. But now there wasn't much choice. 6 months ago, Sarah had a career she loved, working as a project manager for one of the biggest construction companies in the state. The salary had been steady, the benefits good. She had even been saving to buy a small house for herself and Lily. But that life ended the day the company announced mass layoffs under their new CEO. Sarah's name had been on the termination list, and with no backup plan, her savings had been eaten away month by month until there was almost nothing left. The puppy had been a gift from Sarah to Lily on her 5th birthday, a symbol of a happier, more secure time. But the rent was due and the electricity bill had already come with a warning notice. Sarah had put off the decision for as long as she could, but now it had come to this, selling the one thing her daughter loved most, in the hope of buying them a little more time. When a sleek black SUV pulled up at the curb, Lily's small voice rose above the hum of the crowd. "Please, buy our puppy," she said softly, her breath turning into mist in the frigid air. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled the lines of a perfectly tailored black coat. His hair was dark brown, styled neatly, and his eyes were a deep, warm shade of brown that seemed almost golden in the winter light. He glanced at Lily first, his gaze softening slightly at the sight of her small form clutching the shivering animal. Then his eyes shifted toward Sarah. For a moment he froze. Sarah did too. Her lips parted slightly and her face paled. The man standing before her was Michael Reed, the same Michael Reed who had become the company's CEO last summer, the one whose signature had been at the bottom of her layoff notice, the man who had cut her job and left her scrambling to survive. Michael studied her for a few seconds, his expression unreadable. He had seen hundreds of employees' names on that list, and at the time, they were nothing but numbers. He hadn't expected to see one of them here, in the cold, selling a puppy to make ends meet. He hadn't expected her to look at him like that, like he was the person who had taken the ground out from under her feet. "How much for the puppy?" His voice was even, but there was a flicker of something in it. Curiosity, maybe. Sarah straightened, clutching the strap of her bag. "He's not for sale," she said quietly. Her voice was steady, but inside she was shaking. It wasn't true. The puppy was for sale, or they wouldn't be standing here. But she refused to let him think she was desperate enough to take his money. Lily looked up at her mother, confusion in her blue eyes. "But Mommy—" "Not now, Lily," Sarah said, cutting her off gently but firmly. Michael's eyes lingered on Sarah for another moment, then returned to the girl. She was still hugging the puppy, her small hands rubbing its fur as though she could keep both of them warm by sheer willpower. Something about the sight tugged at him in a way he didn't expect. The wind picked up, sending a sharp gust between them. Michael adjusted his coat collar, his gaze steady on Sarah's face. "Maybe I'll see you again," he said simply, and with that, he turned and walked toward the mall entrance, disappearing into the crowd. But even as he stepped inside, the image of the little girl and the woman with the guarded eyes stayed with him. And though neither of them knew it yet, this was only the beginning of a story that would change all three of their lives forever. The next morning, Sarah woke to the muffled hum of the radiator struggling to heat their small apartment. The light filtering through the thin curtains was pale and cold, the kind of winter sunlight that seemed to drain rather than give warmth. She lay still for a moment, listening to the sound of Lily's gentle breathing from the other side of the room. Their apartment was too small for separate bedrooms, so a thin curtain hung across the space to give the illusion of privacy. Her mind drifted back to the man she had seen the day before, Michael Reed. She had tried to push the memory away all night, but it clung to her thoughts like frost on glass. She remembered the way he had looked at her, calm, collected, with no sign of recognition until the moment their eyes met. Then there had been a flicker, almost too quick to catch, before he'd masked it. She hated that she'd even noticed. With a sigh, she sat up, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. Today was another day of searching for jobs, sending applications into the void, and hoping someone, anyone, would respond. But she knew the chances were slim. The job market was brutal, and she had been out of work for months. Her resume looked more like a wound than an achievement now. The sound of soft footsteps broke her thoughts, and Lily appeared, still in her pajamas, holding the puppy close to her chest. His little tail wagged lazily, his head resting in the crook of her arm. "Mommy, he's hungry," Lily said quietly. Her voice was always softer in the mornings, like she didn't want to disturb the fragile peace. Sarah managed a small smile. "All right, let's feed him." As she filled the puppy's bowl with the last of the kibble, her stomach tightened. That was all they had left for him, and she didn't know when she'd be able to buy more. Selling him would solve that problem, at least for him. But the thought of watching Lily lose her best friend felt unbearable. Still, the numbers in her mind didn't lie. Rent was due in less than 2 weeks. The heating bill was already overdue. She was running out of options. After breakfast, she wrapped Lily in her blue jacket and zipped her own coat up tight. They had another long day ahead of them. More time in the cold trying to catch the attention of strangers who might be willing to buy the puppy. Sarah hated herself for it, but it was the only plan she had left. The mall entrance was just as busy as yesterday. Shoppers bustled in and out, their faces half hidden by scarves, their hands clutching bags full of clothes and electronics. Sarah stood to the side with Lily, trying to keep her face neutral, trying not to look like she was asking for help. She had learned that desperation made people uncomfortable, and discomfort made them walk away faster. An hour passed with no luck. A few people stopped to pet the puppy, asking his name, smiling at Lily. But when they heard he was for sale, they shook their heads politely and moved on. Lily's smile began to fade, replaced by the quiet, confused sadness Sarah had been dreading. And then, out of the corner of her eye, Sarah saw him. Michael. He was walking toward them again, dressed in the same black coat, his hands in his pockets. His gaze was fixed on them in a way that made Sarah's breath catch. She thought for a moment about turning away, pretending not to see him, but her feet stayed rooted to the spot. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes moving from Lily to Sarah. "Still selling?" His voice was calm, but there was something deeper in his tone this time. Something almost careful. Sarah hesitated. "Yes," she said finally, her voice quieter than she intended. Michael glanced at the puppy, then crouched slightly so he was at Lily's eye level. "He's a beautiful dog," he said softly. "What's his name?" "Buddy," Lily replied, her small voice almost hopeful. "He's my best friend." Michael's jaw tightened just slightly, but he nodded. "Best friends are important." He reached into his coat and pulled out a black leather wallet. "I'll take him," he said simply. Sarah's stomach twisted. Part of her wanted to snatch Lily up and leave right then. But another part, the part that was counting every dollar left in her bank account, knew she couldn't walk away from the offer. "How much?" Von Michael asked, his eyes never leaving hers. She gave him a number, lower than she'd planned because she suddenly wanted the interaction to be over. But instead of handing her the money, Michael paused. "What if," he said slowly, "I bought him, but let him stay with you?" Sarah frowned. "Why would you do that?" "Because I can," he said. His tone was neutral, but there was something unreadable in his gaze. "And because I don't like seeing a child lose her best friend in the middle of winter." She didn't answer right away. She didn't trust him, not after what had happened. But Lily's eyes were wide, almost pleading, and for a moment, Sarah's guard wavered. Michael held her gaze for a few more seconds, then said, "Think about it." He slipped a business card from his wallet and held it out to her. She took it reluctantly, glancing down at the simple, elegant print. His name, his number, nothing else. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing there in the cold, the card burning in her hand. She didn't know it yet, but accepting that card was the first step into something far more complicated than selling a puppy. That night, Sarah lay awake long after Lily had fallen asleep, the dim glow of the streetlight slipping through the blinds and painting thin silver stripes across the ceiling. The small apartment was silent, except for the occasional creak of the old radiator and the soft, steady breathing of her daughter. But Sarah's mind was anything but quiet. It kept circling back to the black business card now sitting on the small table beside her bed. Michael Reed. Just the name was enough to twist her stomach into knots. She didn't need to Google him. She already knew who he was. The man who had signed the order that shut down her department. The man whose decisions had left her without a job, without security, without the life she'd been building for herself and Lily. She told herself she wouldn't call him. She told herself the card meant nothing. But deep down, the part of her that still believed in miracles was whispering something dangerous. What if? She tried to push the thought away, but then she remembered the look in his eyes when he'd spoken to Lily. It wasn't pity, not exactly, and it wasn't the cold detachment she remembered from seeing him in corporate press conferences. There had been something else there, something she couldn't name. She hated herself for even noticing. By morning, she had decided she would throw the card away. No good could come from letting him back into her life, even in the smallest way. But when she reached for it, intending to toss it in the trash, she hesitated. Her fingers curled around the smooth paper, her eyes tracing the simple print. Just a name and a number. She slipped it back into her coat pocket without fully realizing what she was doing. The day passed slowly. Sarah sent out more job applications, each one feeling like shouting into the void. Lily played on the floor with Buddy, making up stories in her soft, imaginative voice. Every so often, Sarah caught herself looking at the clock, wondering what Michael Reed was doing at that very moment. She hated that she cared. By late afternoon, the winter light had already begun to fade. The apartment felt colder than usual, the air heavy with that bone-deep chill that seeps in when the heat hasn't been paid for on time. Sarah was stirring a pot of soup, thin broth with just enough vegetables to make it look like a meal, when the knock came at the door. She froze. Hardly anyone visited them without warning. Her first instinct was to tell Lily to stay back. She wiped her hands on a towel and opened the door just a crack. Michael Reed was standing in the hallway. The sight of him here, in her worn-down building, was so surreal she almost thought she was dreaming. He looked out of place in every possible way, his black wool coat sharp and tailored, his polished shoes untouched by the slush outside. He might as well have stepped out of another world entirely. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp despite the uneasy flutter in her chest. "I came to see if you'd thought about my offer," he said simply, his tone calm but firm. Sarah tightened her grip on the door. "You mean buying Buddy but letting us keep him? I told you I don't—" "You didn't tell me anything," he interrupted gently. "You just didn't answer." Her jaw tightened. "Well, my answer is no. We don't need charity." "This isn't charity," he said. His eyes flickered briefly toward the living room, where Lily was now peeking around the corner. Buddy clutched in her arms. His voice softened just slightly. "It's a way to help without taking something from you." Sarah felt her defenses wavering, and she hated it. "Why? Why do you care?" There was a pause, and for a moment she thought he might actually give her the truth. But instead he said, "Because I can, and because sometimes I do things that don't make sense to anyone but me." She wanted to slam the door in his face. She wanted to tell him to leave and never come back. But then she saw Lily's expression, the small, flickering hope in her eyes, and something inside her cracked. Michael reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a plain white envelope, and set it on the small table just inside the doorway. "Think about it," he said again. "You don't have to decide tonight." And before she could stop him, he turned and walked down the hallway, his footsteps fading until the building's silence swallowed them. Sarah stared at the envelope for a long moment before finally picking it up. It was heavier than she expected. Inside was a thick stack of bills, more money than she'd seen in one place in months. Her breath caught. Her first instinct was to shove it back into the envelope and pretend it had never happened. But her second instinct, the one that was colder, sharper, and far more practical, was whispering that this money could mean survival. Rent, heat, food. a chance to breathe for the first time in months. She stood there, the envelope trembling in her hands, torn between pride and desperation. And in that moment, Sarah realized something she didn't want to admit. Michael Reed had just placed her in a position where saying no might be harder than saying yes. The envelope sat on the small kitchen table all night, untouched but impossible to ignore. Sarah tried to distract herself, washing the few dishes in the sink, folding laundry, reading Lily a bedtime story, but her mind kept drifting back to it. The knowledge of what it contained seemed to radiate through the air, tugging at her every thought. Even as she lay in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, she could almost feel its weight pressing down on her. By morning, she had convinced herself that she would return it. That was the only choice. She didn't want to be indebted to Michael Reed, not after everything he represented. She told herself it was about pride, about not letting him buy his way into their lives. But somewhere deep down, she knew it was also about fear. Fear of what accepting his help might mean. The day was bitterly cold, the kind of winter morning where the air stung her cheeks the moment she stepped outside. She bundled Lily up for school, kissing her goodbye at the corner before heading back home. The apartment was quiet without her daughter, the silence making the envelope seem even louder in her mind. She finally picked it up, holding it in both hands as if it might burn her. She could take it to his office, leave it at the front desk. She could mail it back with a note telling him to stay away. She imagined the look on his face if she did. Indifference, probably. Maybe even smug satisfaction that she had wasted the opportunity. That thought made something twist in her chest. Before she could talk herself out of it, she pulled on her coat and walked to the nearest bank. She stood outside for a long time, watching people go in and out, all of them looking warmer, more secure, more certain than she felt. She could deposit the money. She could use it to pay rent. She could make sure Lily never had to wear the same two small boots again. Her hand tightened around the envelope. By the time she got back to the apartment, her decision was made, though she couldn't quite admit it to herself yet. She opened the envelope and slowly counted the bills. $5,000. The number made her dizzy. She set aside enough to cover the rent and the heating bill, tucking the rest back inside as though hiding it would make it less real. That evening, as she was preparing dinner, there was another knock at the door. This time she didn't freeze. She knew who it was. She opened it to find Michael standing there again, his black coat dusted with snow, his expression unreadable. "You didn't call," he said simply. "I didn't need to," she replied, crossing her arms. "I already know what I'm going to say." "And what's that?" She hesitated, then let out a breath. "I'll accept your arrangement, but only because it will help Lily. This isn't about you and me. You don't get to pretend this makes us even." He studied her for a moment, and for a fleeting second, she thought she saw a flicker of relief in his eyes. "Understood," he said, "but I need you to understand something too. Once you accept my help, you're in my world, whether you like it or not." His words sent a ripple of unease through her. "I'm not part of your world," she said firmly. "You might be surprised," he murmured, glancing past her into the apartment. "I'll send someone tomorrow with the paperwork. We'll make it official. You keep the dog. I handle the costs." "Simple. Nothing about this is simple," she said quietly. He gave a small, almost knowing smile before turning to leave. "It will be, for now." When the door closed, Sarah stood there for a long time, her heart pounding. She told herself she had made the right decision, that she had done what was best for her daughter. But a part of her knew the truth. She had just opened a door she might never be able to close. That night, as Lily snuggled into bed with Buddy at her side, Sarah watched her sleep and felt an ache deep in her chest. She wanted to believe this would be the end of it, that Michael would fade back into his world and leave them in peace. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The next morning came with a heavy sky, clouds hanging low and thick over the city, as if they too carried the weight of unspoken things. Sarah woke early, earlier than she wanted, her mind refusing to rest. There was no escaping the reality that by agreeing to Michael's arrangement, she had stepped into something far larger than herself. She kept telling herself this was temporary, just long enough to steady things for Lily. But she couldn't shake the sensation that she had given away more than she understood. The knock on the door came right on time. When she opened it, a sharply dressed man in a charcoal suit stood there, holding a leather folder. His expression was polite but detached, the way someone looks when they're paid to be courteous. "Miss Hayes?" he asked. Yes, she replied warily. Mr. Reed sent me. I'm here with the paperwork. It outlines the agreement in full. Your obligations, his contributions. I'll need your signature. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, and Sarah's stomach tightened. He placed the folder on the kitchen table and began explaining each clause. Michael would cover the rent for the next 6 months, all utilities and any expenses related to Lily's care. He would also pay for veterinary care for Buddy. In return, Sarah had to agree to periodic in-person check-ins with Michael to discuss progress. That phrase stuck in her mind like a thorn. Check-ins? She asked, frowning. The man gave a small shrug. Mr. Reed likes to oversee his investments personally. She bristled at the word investment, but she signed anyway, each stroke of the pen feeling heavier than the last. When the man left, the apartment felt different, like the walls had moved in closer. Later that day, she received a text from an unknown number. Dinner, 7 p.m. I'll send a car. It didn't say who it was, but she knew. At exactly 7, a sleek black sedan pulled up in front of her building. The driver opened the door for her without a word. Sarah wore the best thing she owned, a navy dress she had saved for job interviews. But next to the gleaming car and the driver's tailored coat, she still felt out of place. When she arrived, she was led into an upscale restaurant that felt like another world. The lighting was low and golden, the air scented with something rich and unfamiliar. Michael was already seated at a corner table, his black coat draped over the chair beside him, a glass of deep red wine in his hand. You're late, he said, though the clock had just struck 7. The driver got here right on time, she replied evenly. He smiled faintly as though amused by her resistance. Sit. You look better than I expected. She ignored the backhanded compliment and sat across from him. The waiter appeared almost instantly, pouring her water and listing menu items she couldn't pronounce. Michael ordered for both of them without asking what she wanted. They ate in a strange, tense quiet for a while. The only sounds the clink of silverware and the low hum of conversation from other tables. Finally, Michael set down his fork. You're wondering why I'm doing this, he said, leaning back in his chair. I'm wondering why you care, she corrected. His gaze didn't waver. Maybe I don't. Maybe I just see a problem I can fix, and I don't like leaving things broken. Her hands tightened around her glass. People aren't problems to fix, and not everything broken needs you. There was a flicker in his expression, something like regret, quickly masked. You used to be more grateful, he said quietly. Her heart lurched. We're not talking about the past, she said sharply. No, he agreed. But the past has a way of talking about us. She didn't reply. She didn't want to ask what he meant, because she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. When the dinner ended, he walked her to the waiting car. Snow had begun to fall soft and slow, settling on the shoulders of his coat. He opened the door for her, but before she could get in, he said, I'll see you again soon, Sarah. We have more to discuss. She didn't ask when. She just slid into the car, her mind spinning. As the city lights blurred past the window, she realized this wasn't just about helping Lily. Michael had his own reasons she couldn't yet see. And whether she wanted it or not, she was already in too deep to walk away. Snow fell heavier that night, layering the streets in white silence. Sarah sat curled up on the couch, her knees tucked to her chest, staring at the dim reflection of the city lights in the window. Lily was asleep in the bedroom, clutching Buddy in her arms, but Sarah's mind wouldn't rest. Michael's words from the dinner, "We have more to discuss," echoed inside her like a low drumbeat. She hated how they lingered, how they seemed to carry a meaning she wasn't ready to confront. The knock came just after 9. It wasn't tentative, it was firm, deliberate. She froze, her heart stumbling in her chest. For a moment she considered pretending she wasn't home, but then Lily's soft voice called from the bedroom. "Mommy, someone's at the door." Sarah opened it to find Michael standing there, snowflakes melting into the dark wool of his coat. He looked almost out of place against the faded hallway wallpaper, as if the building itself didn't know how to contain someone like him. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "It's late," she replied, gripping the doorframe. "Late doesn't matter. This can't wait." There was something in his tone, quiet but carrying weight, that made her step aside. He walked in, his presence immediately filling the small space. For a moment he just stood there, looking around the apartment, his gaze lingering on the small stack of unopened bills on the table, the worn blanket draped over the couch, Lily's tiny boots by the door. "I used to live in a place like this," he said finally. She blinked, thrown off. "You?" He nodded once. "Before I was anything. Before the suits, before the boardrooms. My mother worked 2 jobs. My father didn't stick around." Sarah folded her arms. "And this is supposed to make me feel what? Sorry for you?" "No," he said, his voice sharpening. "It's supposed to explain why I can't just walk away from this." She swallowed but said nothing. He moved closer, his eyes fixed on hers. "There's something you don't know, Sarah, about why you lost your job. Why why my company made that decision." Her chest tightened. "I know enough. You cut the division to protect profits. I was just collateral damage." He shook his head slowly. "It wasn't just about numbers. There was a leak in that branch. Someone was feeding internal data to competitors. The board pushed for a purge. I argued to keep a few people. Your name was one of them. I lost that argument." Her mouth went dry. "Why would you argue for me? We barely knew each other." That flicker of something she'd noticed at dinner returned, stronger this time. "Because I did know you," he said quietly, "long before you knew me. We went to the same high school, Sarah. Different worlds, same hallways. You were the girl who stood up for people when no one else did. I never forgot that." The room seemed to shrink around her. She tried to summon an image, but his face back then was a blur. "You're saying you remembered me from high school, and that's why you, what? Decided to insert yourself into my life now?" "Not just that," he said, his voice dropping lower. "When I saw you selling that puppy in the cold, something hit me hard. It felt like I was watching the one person who once believed in people more than anyone else finally give up. And I couldn't let that happen. Not again." Her throat tightened. She wanted to be angry, to throw his words back at him, but part of her felt something she didn't want to name. "Michael," she began, but the sound of Lily's small footsteps interrupted her. "Mommy." Lily appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. She looked at Michael, then at Sarah. "Is he staying?" Sarah hesitated, but Michael answered for her. "Not tonight, sweetheart. I just needed to make sure you're both okay." Lily nodded sleepily and padded back to bed. When the door closed behind him minutes later, Sarah leaned against it, her breath unsteady. His words had stirred something buried deep, a past connection she hadn't known existed, a truth that made everything messier, heavier. For the first time, she wondered if Michael Reed wasn't the villain she'd painted in her mind, and that possibility scared her more than the idea that he was. The snowstorm had worsened overnight, swallowing the city in a blinding white haze. The wind howled against Sarah's windows like a living thing, rattling the panes, making the old building groan. Lily was curled up on the couch under a blanket, trying to read a book by the dim glow of the lamp. But Sarah couldn't focus on anything except the gnawing unease in her chest. Michael's visit the previous night had left her restless, her mind spinning with unanswered questions. She had tried to dismiss his confession about knowing her in high school as some kind of manipulative tactic, but there had been something in his voice, something raw and unpolished, that didn't fit the image of a cold, ruthless CEO. She hated that she even cared enough to think about it. By late afternoon, the snow had buried the street so deeply that it was hard to tell where the sidewalks ended and the road began. The heater was sputtering, barely managing to push out warmth, and Sarah was debating whether she should try to borrow a space heater from her neighbor when the lights flickered. Once, twice, and then the power went out. The apartment fell into silence except for the muffled howl of the wind outside. Lily looked up from her book, wide-eyed. "Mommy?" "It's okay, sweetheart," Sarah said, masking her own worry. "It's just the storm. The lights will come back soon." But deep down, she wasn't sure. This building's wiring was old, and outages in weather like this could last for hours, sometimes days. And with no power, there was no heat. She moved quickly, gathering blankets and pulling Lily close, trying to conserve warmth. But as the minutes dragged into an hour, the cold began to seep in, biting at their fingers and toes. Sarah could feel Lily's small body shivering against her. She was just about to check on her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, when her phone buzzed in her pocket. The screen lit up with a name she wasn't expecting. Michael. She hesitated, staring at the display. She could ignore it. She should ignore it. But something made her swipe to answer. Sarah? His voice was urgent, cutting through the static of the call. The storm's worse than the forecast predicted. I've been trying to get a hold of you all day. We're fine, she said quickly, though her voice betrayed a slight tremor. Your building's on the outage list, he continued. The grid in that part of the city might be down until tomorrow or longer. It's already below freezing. You and Lily can't stay there. We'll be fine, she repeated sharper this time. We have blankets. Blankets aren't going to stop frostbite, Sarah. I'm coming to get you. You don't need to. Don't argue with me, he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for debate. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Pack what you need. The line went dead. She stood there for a moment, phone still in hand, trying to decide whether to lock the door and pretend she'd left when he arrived. But another gust of wind rattled the building, and she felt Lily burrow deeper into her side, whispering, It's so cold, Mommy. 20 minutes later, a set of headlights cut through the swirling snow outside her window. The knock at the door was loud enough to shake the frame. When she opened it, Michael stood there, dusted in snow, his coat collar turned up against the wind. Without a word, he stepped inside, scooped up the small bag she had half-heartedly packed, and knelt down to Lily's level. Hey, kiddo, he said softly, giving her a reassuring smile. Ready to go somewhere warm? Lily nodded shyly, and Michael scooped her up as if she weighed nothing, wrapping his coat tighter around her. The walk to his car was treacherous, the snow knee-deep in places. Michael kept one arm securely around Lily and the other firmly around Sarah's, guiding her through the icy drifts. She could feel the heat radiating from him even through his coat, his grip steady and unyielding. Once inside the SUV, the heater roared to life, filling the cabin with blessed warmth. Lily immediately relaxed, curling up against Michael in the back seat while Sarah sat in the front, staring at the windshield as the wipers struggled against the snow. He drove carefully, the tires crunching through the packed ice, the city almost unrecognizable beneath the storm's white shroud. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Michael broke the silence. You don't have to trust me, Sarah. Not yet. But right now, the only thing that matters is keeping you both safe. Everything else can wait. She turned to look at him, the faint glow from the dashboard casting shadows across his face. And for the first time, she saw something there she hadn't before. An unwavering certainty, as if he would move heaven and earth to get them through this night. Somewhere deep inside, a wall she had built months ago began to crack. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the world wrapped in a thick, glistening blanket of snow. From the wide bay windows of Michael's penthouse, the city looked almost peaceful. White rooftops, silent streets, and sunlight spilling like gold over the frozen landscape. But inside Sarah, there was no peace. She had spent the night in the guest room, lying awake long after Lily had fallen asleep, the sound of the wind replaced by the soft hum of central heating. She should have been relieved, grateful even, that they were safe and warm. But her mind had been consumed by questions she had avoided for too long. Questions about him. Questions about why he had been there that night at the market. Questions about what he had confessed in fragments over the past few days. When she emerged from the room, Lily was already at the breakfast table, giggling as Michael helped her pour syrup onto a stack of pancakes. The sight was so disarming that Sarah almost forgot herself. Almost. Michael glanced up, and for a fleeting moment, his expression softened in a way that made her heart ache. There's coffee in the pot, he said, and food if you're hungry. She poured herself a cup, the aroma cutting through her fog of unease. But she didn't sit. Instead, she looked directly at him. We need to talk. Now. His smile faded, and he nodded, leading her into his study. The room was warm, but carried the faint scent of cedar and leather, its floor-to-ceiling windows casting long shadows across the polished wood. Tell me the truth, she said, folding her arms. All of it. No more half answers. For a long moment he didn't speak. He just studied her, as if weighing whether she could handle what he was about to say. Then he sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. You think I'm just the man who signed a piece of paper that destroyed your life, he began. And you're right. On paper, that's exactly what I did. I took over Whitford Industries, and in the restructuring, your mother's department was shut down. Hundreds of people lost their jobs. I told myself it was business, not personal. But for me, It was personal from the start. Sarah frowned. What are you talking about? I knew you, he said quietly. Not just from high school. Before that. Your father. He worked for my family's company when I was a kid. He was one of the few people who treated me like I wasn't just the heir to a fortune. He used to take me fishing with him. Told me stories about how much he loved his little girl. You. And then one day he was gone. My father fired him, destroyed his career, and your family moved away. I didn't see you again until years later at school. You didn't remember me, but I remembered you. I remembered everything. Sarah felt the air leave her lungs. Memories flickered. Her father coming home tired but smiling, the smell of lake water on his clothes, the way he used to laugh when telling her stories about the shy boy from the office. When I bought Whitford, Michael continued, I told myself I was fixing things, taking control so people wouldn't be treated the way your father was. But I made a mistake. I didn't see the human cost of my decisions until I saw you again and realized I'd done to your mother exactly what my father did to yours. I've been trying to make it right ever since. She shook her head, torn between anger and disbelief. You can't just undo years of damage by showing up and playing hero. I know, he said, stepping closer, but I can try. I've already reinstated your mother's benefits. I've set up a fund for her and for you. And if you'll let me, I want to do more. Not out of guilt, because I care, because I never stopped caring. Her eyes stung, but she refused to let tears fall. You think that's enough? No, he admitted, his voice low. But maybe it's a start. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the heater and Lily's laughter drifting in from the other room. Sarah searched his face, looking for any trace of manipulation, but what she saw instead was something that scared her more. Sincerity, vulnerability. A man stripped of all his titles, all his wealth, standing there as if ready to accept whatever judgment she gave him. Slowly she exhaled. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said, but I can't deny what you did for us last night, or what you're trying to do now. A flicker of relief crossed his face. Then maybe we can start from here. Not as CEO and the woman who hates him, just Michael and Sarah. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped past him into the hallway, where Lily was now telling him some wild story about the puppy they were still trying to sell. And in that moment, Sarah realized something. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. If you want, I can now create a bonus epilogue that ties everything together emotionally and gives the kind of shockingly happy ending you asked for earlier. Do you want me to write it? In my opinion, the ending of this story carries a powerful message about redemption, forgiveness, and the unexpected ways life can heal even the deepest wounds. It begins with loss, mistrust, and heartbreak, but it doesn't stay there. It evolves into something transformative. The fact that the very man who once caused the heroine's pain becomes the person who helps rebuild her life gives the story a poetic symmetry. What makes the ending so moving is not just the happy resolution, but the journey the characters take to get there. The emotional battles, the moments of vulnerability, and the courage it takes to open one's heart again. It reminds us that people can change, that life can surprise us, and that love often finds us in the most unlikely places. This is not simply a romance. It's a story of resilience, of facing the past without letting it define the future. And in that, I think it leaves readers with hope, warmth, and the belief that even the most broken beginnings can lead to the most beautiful endings. If you want, I can also make a very emotional epilogue in this tone, so it leaves readers in tears. Would you like me to do that?